Hello, class. We are Group 3, and we are joined today to discuss the implications of Spark Pharma in Russia and whether they should cease operations or continue business as usual. So, a little bit of context. Spark Pharma is a global pharmaceutical company currently located in 24 countries. One of those countries happens to be in Russia, and more specifically Moscow. The operations and sales teams currently makes up 3% of their total sales. So a small portion nonetheless. And a little bit more context about the current geopolitical environment in Russia. They recently, in 2022, invaded Ukraine, which caused global instability and massive disruptions to the supply chain. And companies who are operating in Russia and even outside need to decide whether they continue operations or to exit, and whether to do business with companies that are operating in Russia. So as a group, we decided that it was best if Spark Pharma were to cease operations in Russia and completely pull out. First and foremost, we feel Spark has an obligation to protect the health and safety of our employees, both in Russia and outside. Furthermore, we have made a commitment to meet our corporate, social, and ethical responsibilities. And because of this, we must condemn the aggression and support global peace and human rights. By exiting, we hope this shows that we value the loyalty of our customers and employees who work for us worldwide. We realize that there will be financial losses, most of which will be in the short term, but we promise to our stakeholders that any short-term financial losses and setbacks will be met with long-term sustainability.
So going with this decision, we had pressure, I guess, looked into outside pressure and influence. So the pressure from the public and media and investors should be a very significant factor in their decision. It comes with ethical and humanitarian concerns, whether the obligation to provide essential medicines to Russian citizens who are not responsible for the war, also leading to the potential harm caused by withdrawing life-saving drugs. Another influence to consider would be the financial implications. So potential impact on sales in other countries not strongly opposed to the war, for example, India, and the risk of asset seizure by the Russian government if we were to withdraw. The reputational risks. So you have potential for boycotts and social media campaigns, and precedent for future geopolitical crisis. Other considerations would be employee considerations, like we mentioned, the impact on Russian employees who have built up for the business over the years, and pressure from employees in other countries. The legal and regulatory factors would be compliance with international sanctions and potential legal ramifications if we were staying or leaving. And the growing external pressure. So pressure from shareholders, government officials, and the citizens, and the changing societal expectations about corporate behavior in response to political events. So Belinda, the CEO from Spark Pharma, should definitely weigh against all of these factors by balancing the immediate pressure with long-term consequences while staying true to Spark's missions and stakeholder responsibilities.
So at this time, Spark is facing a moral dilemma. Does it continue to provide life-saving medicine in Russia, which in turn supports a government responsible for an unjust war, or does it leave Russia entirely and abandon potentially innocent customers having no other access to similarly effective medications? Spark has considered three options: ceasing ceasing operations in Russia, continue selling only life-saving medications at no profit, or continue to provide all products as normal. Considering Spark's moral stances, the last choice would not be considered by the CEO. Looking at the moral trade-offs by ceasing business in Russia, patients could lose access to medication or be forced to use less effective drugs. In some cases, other Russian suppliers can provide similar medications. And however, lack of access to medication puts pressure on Russia to end the war, and it encourages Russians to push for change in their government. Now the trade-offs, if Spark was to continue operations, they, on one hand, they don't abandon potentially innocent patients, but sales support a government that started an unjust war. Spark should also ask itself if under normal conditions would they sell its life-saving medicines at no profit? And also, would Spark enter a new market to sell if its life-saving drugs without the knowledge it would not make a profit? Businesses should not forget that the whole point of pulling out of Russia is to apply pressure for them to stop a war that is entirely in their power to stop. If Russia is not denied access to the things it needs, what incentive is there for them to stop the war?
Now we'll talk about Spark's implications for their ability to maximize shareholder value. First, let's talk about the responsibility of the CEO. The CEO has a fiduciary responsibility to act in the best interest of shareholders in order to maximize profit for the company and maximize shareholder value. In order to do this, the CEO needs to understand the implications of exiting Russia and weigh the pros and cons of the two. So let's talk about some of the pros for exiting Russia. Exiting can ignite investor confidence if they believe that the stock value will be hurt if the company continues operations in Russia due to the negative public sentiment. Studies show that companies' social media presence and public opinion can strongly impact stock price. Showing investors that the company is willing to make hard decisions to protect their brand and identity can ensure investors that the company is making the right decisions in their interests. Cons of leaving Russia could be the loss of sales revenue that Spark generates there. Also, the potential moral dilemma of no longer providing medicines to the people and customers it has built in the country, and as well as leaving behind many of their employees that they have in that country as well. Leaving Russia could also cause nations that support Spark to begin opposing their business. Now, the CEO needs to strongly consider public sentiment impacts on shareholder value when making this decision. Only 3% of total sales are generated in Russia for Spark. The immediate impact on the company's value and position can be much more strongly affected than the loss of that 3%. This needs to be weighed heavily upon the decision when the CEO is making it. Now,
All right, so some of the key lessons that we learned through this case study and for Spark Pharma revolve about balancing ethical responsibilities, risk of reputation, and operational challenges, as well as long-term strategies in these challenging political and social markets. So one of our first lessons was balancing your ethics versus your business. Companies will have to navigate the tension between moral values and meeting financial obligations to their shareholders. Exiting Russia means abandoning vulnerable populations in need of this healthcare. And ethical exits can also enhance the company's global reputation, but can lead to major financial losses. Another point would be their reputation. The decision to exit sends a strong signal about the company's values and their ethical stance. However, how the exit is executed can impact the public perception significantly. Another lesson would be the stakeholder considerations. Decisions that are made will not only affect profits, but also they can impact their employees, their customers, their shareholders, and the local community that depend on that company's operations. Ignoring those particular groups can lead to, again, long-term reputational and operational damage. A long-term lesson that could be learned is the actions in Russia could influence future approaches in other countries that also have similar political and ethical issues. Exiting the market can sever relationships and make future re-entry more difficult. especially if it's done abruptly or without considering those local stakeholders. Some of the ethical implications that Spark would have as a pharmaceutical company, they do have a moral obligation, as we stated before, to provide those life-saving medications and healthcare solutions. So leaving Russia signals a commitment to the international values of the company, but it does risk abandoning the patients in need. If Spark remained in Russia, it might be perceived as indirectly supporting the actions of its government, but the withdrawal could align Spark Pharma with international efforts to isolate the Russian government, but may also be viewed as prioritizing pressure over patient welfare. Another ethical implication would be the ethical businesses practices that require treating all stakeholders, including patients, employees, and local partners, fair and justly, regardless of their location. The decision to exit could create inequality in accessibility to healthcare, causing Russians to lose access to Spark's vital medications. And then the decision to leave also sets a precedent for how Spark Pharma handles ethical dilemmas in other geopolitical contexts. Withdrawing from Russia could establish a stricter ethical standard, but could limit this company's flexibility in other markets. So food for thought. As you know, companies all over face growing pressure to act as ethical players in global areas, balancing their values and operational and financial realities. They're expected to act as moral players in the world stage, taking stances on global issues beyond their business's values and objectives. So a question that we could think about, should companies such as Spark Pharma always prioritize ethics over economics? And how can they ensure consistency on these decisions? So for our recommendations for the future, some changes that they could make would be to engage business stakeholders, so communicate openly and support local employees with exit strategies such as a severance payment or a new job placement.
Others would be to develop a global ethics framework so companies can establish clear guidelines for operation in politically or ethically sensitive markets. They can strengthen crisis preparedness, build contingency plans for sudden market exits, and have a procedure to access geopolitical risks proactively.
They can collaborate with industry peers, work together with like-minded companies to establish unified actions and reduce individual risks, as well as utilize technology, use data available to monitor risk and measure business impacts of corporate decisions.
And lastly, understanding and analyzing the financial implications of any decision that you may make. And one thing to keep in mind, one recommendation we came up with is ensuring that any short-term gain that you might get financially, it doesn't compromise any long-term reputational damage or integrity that that might come with that decision. So to tie it all together, we wanted to leave you with a profound quote from Warren Buffett, which says, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently. And so that wraps up our presentation. Thank you very much.